Welcome to Colon Rectal Surgery Associates Biofeedback Therapy Patient Education. During this presentation, you'll receive basic information on the digestive system and how we define normal bowel function. You'll also learn about the definition and causes for both constipation and diarrhea. We'll discuss the anatomy of the pelvic floor muscles. And lastly, we'll discuss what you should expect when you are taking biofeedback therapy sessions. Learning more about the digestive system can help you understand how lifestyle habits can affect our bowel function. So we want to consider the digestive system everywhere from the mouth to the anus. So I've placed my pointer here on this illustration's mouth area. So as we take food in, we begin to chew it, which starts the breaking down process. It also makes it easy to swallow down the esophagus, where there it travels into the stomach. In the stomach, it is further broken down by the stomach acids, and as it leaves the stomach, it enters into the small intestine. Now its function is to absorb the nutrients from the food that we have eaten. It's approximately 21 to 22 feet in length. And as it leaves the small intestine, it's then going to enter the colon, which is about 4 to 5 feet in length, the last 5 to 6 inches being the rectum. So when we look at the function of the colon, I want to draw your attention to this area here that I'm circling with my pointer. And I'd like you to think of it this way. By the time the food I've eaten has reached the colon, it should be nothing more than liquid waste. In the function of the colon, I have drawn some blue arrows here to represent what its function is, and that is the reabsorption of water back in the body to help with hydration. And as this water is being pulled back into the body, you'll find that the stool will go from a liquid waste to a soft form stool, somewhere between a type 3 and a type 5. Now you're going to learn more about these types when you're working with your biofeedback nurse. So let's talk about what normal bowel function is. It's actually a range, and that can be anywhere having up to 3 bowel movements per day, or at least 1 bowel movement once every 3 days. So when we look at what constipation is, we look at it 3 different ways. The first is when you have a bowel movement less than every 3 days. The second is illustrated here. You see this starts out as liquid waste, but for some reason, as it travels through the colon, an excessive amount of water is reabsorbed back into the body, resulting in hard pellets or stools passing. And the third is difficulty in passing stool, regardless of what your stool consistency is or that incomplete evacuation feeling. Now there could be a number of causes, and we've listed a few here on the screen. The first being suppressing the urge. Another would be chronic anxiety or stress, inadequate water and fiber intake, a lack of exercise, and lastly medications, including NSAIDs, and cardiac medications. Whereas diarrhea is defined as when the stool moves too quickly or water is not being reabsorbed properly back into the body. And there's a number of causes that bring that on as well. Fatty foods, bacterial or viral infections, stress, prescription drugs, magnesium-based medications including antacids in supplements, overeating, alcohol, and intestinal diseases or disorders. So this is where I really want to spend some time, because I want you to have a really good idea of the muscles that are involved in the pelvic floor. So we're going to talk about the anatomy of the rectum and the anal canal. And so with my pointer here, I just kind of want to give you some landmarks. This area here is considered the rectum. Here would be classified as the anal canal. This little archway you see here would be the anus, along with this illustration right here. Now I want to direct your attention to the pink area here and here, as well as around this anal area. And that is actually one muscle. and it's called the internal sphincter muscle. It's an involuntary muscle. So to give you an example, your heart is an involuntary muscle. And what involuntary means is that it works on its own. You don't have to think about it. So for example, your heart pumps on its own. You don't have to think about it pumping. The same holds true with the internal sphincter muscle. And its job is to stay closed and neutral until there is a sensation of the rectum stretching, and then it will actually open to help pass stool. This red shaded area you see here, and again here, and also around the circular area here of the anus, is another muscle, and it's called the external sphincter muscle. And this is one of the muscles that you may have had some testing done when you were at the pelvic floor on. And unlike the internal sphincter, it's a voluntary muscle. And what that means is that we actually have control over that muscle, meaning that we have the ability to tighten or to relax that muscle. The other thing I want to note about this slide with you is that both the internal and external muscles are really wrapped around this anal canal area that you see here. So here again, just to kind of give you a landmark, here's the rectum, and then right here is the anal canal. This again is the anus. A little bit harder to see this time. This area here is the internal sphincter muscle. And here again is the internal sphincter. And this area here, and again here, is that external sphincter muscle. Now, if you recall in that previous slide, I had talked about how those two muscles wrapped around this anal canal. But when you look at this illustration, it almost appears as if the external sphincter muscle is moving away from the anal canal. And that is because there's an actual third muscle that joins and links into that external sphincter muscle. And that muscle is over here in this illustration. Right here is where my pointer is, and that's called the puborectalis muscle. This muscle starts at the pubic bone. It wraps itself around behind the rectum and the anal canal, and then reattaches to its pubic bone. And in its natural resting state, kind of what you see there, just as you're sitting in the chair now, there's this pull, this tension that's created. And when there's that pull, there's an angle that they call an anal rectal angle. Kind of looks like that 90-degree angle that you see in this illustration. Sometimes I like to say to people, think of it like a kink in the garden hose, because when you've got that tension, it just helps prevent stool from passing when you don't want it to pass. Well, if you recall, in the previous slide, I talked about how the internal sphincter muscle was an involuntary muscle and we really don't have control over it. Well, we don't have direct control over the puborectalis muscle either. The only one we have control over is that external sphincter muscle. But I like to talk about these muscles in the aspect that they like to work together, almost as if they're playing the childhood game, follow the leader. But in this particular case, the external sphincter is always going to be the leader. And what I mean by that is what the external sphincter muscle does, the other two muscles will follow. So I want to give you an example to better explain this. So when you do not have an urge to go to the bathroom, the rectum should be free of stool. It should be completely empty. So as stool moves into the rectum begins to stretch. As the rectum begins to stretch, the internal sphincter muscle goes from that closed neutral position to open, because that's its job. That's what it's supposed to do. At the same time, we get this message in our brain that sends us that urge to go to the bathroom. Well, if the brain says it's not a good time to go, you're just not in the bathroom, you need to hold the stool back, it's going to send a message to this external sphincter muscle to say, push back the stool. So this muscle is going to go from a closed neutral position to a squeeze and tight position. And in doing so, the external sphincter muscle is also going to tighten. And what stool has been in the rectum is going to get pushed out of the rectum, back up into the colon. The rectum is going to go back to its natural shape. Urge goes away. So let's do this again, but I'm going to bring that third muscle into it, that puborectalis muscle. So now stool moves into the rectum stretches, internal sphincter muscle opens because that's its job, that's what it's supposed to do. This time the message from the brain is, it's safe, let's pass stool. So that external sphincter muscle, the one we have control over, is going to go from a closed neutral position to a relaxed and lengthened position. And in doing so, the internal sphincter muscle is also going to stay relaxed and open. But more importantly, we're going to see a change in how this muscle here, this pubral rectalis muscle, looks. Because if you recall, kind of where my pointer is here, that these muscles link in together, the pubral rectalis and the external sphincter muscle. So as the external sphincter muscle begins to relax, this pubral rectalis muscle you see here also begins to lengthen and relax. And in doing so, that anal rectal angle that you see here begins to widen. And as it widens, there's a straightening that occurs between the rectum and the anal canal, making it easier for you to pass stool. So what we do here, like I mentioned earlier, is we work with the external sphincter muscle, the one you have control with, so that because we know that what it does, the pubral rectalis muscle will do as well, because they work together. Now I want to take a little moment here to talk about another part of what we do in biofeedback. Besides teaching the muscles to relax, as in the previous slide, sometimes we work with patients who have weakened muscles or experience accidental bowel leakage. And so this is a good illustration that kind of explains a little bit about what we can do to strengthen those muscles. So here again, here's the very bottom part of the rectum, anal canal. The pink shaded areas here are again the internal sphincter muscle. The red shaded areas are again the external. This here represents stool. So when you're passing stool, the sphincter muscles are nice, they're open, they're relaxed, stool's passing. Well, what happens is when you're done passing stool, there's almost like this little snapback, kind of like a slap, like you hear me doing with my hands right now. And what that does is it kind of helps clean away any stool residue that you have here. Well, when the muscles are weakened, instead of having that really sharp snap, you might have more of a flap, kind of sound like I'm doing with my hands right now. Well, what that can happen then is stool can get trapped either in between where the muscles are, behind, or even in front of. And so then you get up, you start walking. You might notice going to the bathroom later and wiping and seeing residues of stool. That it could be a real possibility. So we also work with that external sphincter muscle to strengthen, to help prevent that from happening to you in the future. There's a couple things I want to note on here because we talked about at the very beginning of this PowerPoint that lifestyle habits play a big role, and you'll be talking more with your biofeedback nurse about this. But if you do have issues with leakage, you may want to consider reducing your caffeine intake, reducing artificial sweeteners, and increasing your intake of soluble fibers because they really do help improve stool consistency. So let's take a moment and talk about what to expect in a biofeedback session. In looking at this picture here, you can see that you'll be in the nurse's office, you'll be fully dressed. We recommend that you wear comfortable clothes because the sessions generally take about 1 hour. Here you can see the nurse is explaining to the patient what the information means that they're seeing on the computer. This is kind of an example of what you're going to see, and that is we're going to be monitoring muscle activity from 2 parts of your body. The red area is going to be the anal sensor monitor, and you'll learn a little bit more about your sensor options with your biofeedback nurse. The green area is the abdominal sensor, so we're going to want to see what kind of muscle activities your abdominals are doing during these sessions as well. So here are some examples of sensors you may be using in your biofeedback sessions. We currently are not using the vaginal sensor. I want to point that out. The sensor on the left is the anal sensor. That is one option that we have when we're doing, when we're monitoring the activity of the external sphincter muscle. Your biofeedback nurse will go into more detail about the sensors when she meets with you and talks with you about your needs and concerns. And the one on the right is the abdominal sensor. Again, like I mentioned in the previous slide, we do monitor that activity. So you'll have a sensor that looks very much like an EKG patch. So again, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to go through this presentation. Please let your biofeedback nurse know any questions you may have, and we look forward to serving you. Thank you.